What if the most powerful agricultural breakthrough ever discovered wasn't a machine, a chemical, or a new seed, but soil? Not just any soil, but a dark, living earth, so rich it can grow food year after year without fertilizer, without exhaustion, without collapse. While modern farms pour billions into inputs just to keep depleted land alive, this soil does the opposite. It locks nutrients in place, holds water through drought, and actually becomes more fertile with time. It was engineered thousands of years ago, proven by modern science, and then quietly pushed out of the spotlight. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. Welcome to Timeless Harvest, where we uncover the agricultural knowledge that shaped civilizations and ask why it was abandoned. In this video, we're uncovering a soil system so effective it threatened the foundation of industrial farming itself. Researchers knew about it decades ago. The data was there, the results were undeniable, and then the trail went cold. Stay with this story to the end, because you'll not only understand how this soil works, but why you were never supposed to hear about it, and how you can begin using it yourself today. Deep in the Amazon rainforest, scientists encountered a contradiction that shouldn't exist. Beneath one of the most biologically intense ecosystems on Earth, they found soils that should have been exhausted, acidic, and lifeless. Instead, scattered across the jungle floor were vast patches of dark, almost black earth that produced abundant crops with no signs of depletion. These soils were not natural, they were intentionally created. Archaeological evidence revealed that indigenous communities engineered this earth more than 2,000 years ago, transforming some of the poorest tropical soils on the planet into land capable of sustaining dense populations. Long after those civilizations disappeared, the soil they left behind was still feeding forests, crops, and life itself. For modern scientists accustomed to soils that degrade within decades, this discovery raised an unsettling question. How could ancient people create something modern agriculture still cannot? The mystery deepened as researchers analyzed the composition of this Amazonian dark earth, later named terra preta. Unlike ordinary soil, terra preta is infused with biochar, a form of charcoal produced by slowly burning organic material in low oxygen conditions. This ancient charcoal isn't inert. Its structure is riddled with microscopic pores, creating a vast internal surface area that traps nutrients before they can wash away in rain. Nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, and trace minerals remain locked in place instead of leaching into rivers. Water clings to the biochar, like a reservoir, allowing plants to survive dry periods without drowning their roots during heavy rains. What appears simple on the surface is, at the microscopic level, a highly engineered system designed to stabilize fertility indefinitely. Even more astonishing is how terra preta behaves over time. Most agricultural soil follows a predictable path. Each harvest strips nutrients, each season requires more fertilizer, and each year the land becomes harder to sustain. Terra preta does the opposite, it regenerates. Organic waste added to the soil is captured rather than lost. Microbial communities flourish inside the biochar's pores, multiplying and strengthening the soil's ability to feed plants. Instead of degrading, the soil improves with every growing cycle. Radiocarbon dating confirms what farmers observed firsthand. These soils remain fertile for thousands of years, not centuries, not generations. Thousands, and that reality forces a confrontation with everything modern agriculture assumes about soil, inputs, and the limits of land itself. By the middle of the 20th century, terra preta was no longer just an archaeological curiosity. In the 1950s and 1960s, soil scientists began studying it with serious intent, running controlled experiments and field trials to understand how ancient Amazonian farmers had achieved something modern agriculture could not. The results sent waves through agricultural research circles. Experimental farms using biochar-rich soils showed dramatic improvements in yield, stability, and resilience. Crops grown on treated land required little to no fertilizer, yet produced more food season after season. For a brief moment, Terra preta was seen as a possible answer to some of the biggest challenges facing humanity: depleted soils, rising input costs, and the looming threat of global hunger. The idea that fertility could be built once and maintained indefinitely challenged the assumption that food production must always depend on continuous chemical inputs. As the data accumulated, the implications became impossible to ignore. Soils amended with biochar showed reductions in synthetic fertilizer use ranging from 80 to nearly 100%. Carbon that would normally return to the atmosphere was locked into the soil for centuries, turning farmland into a long-term carbon sink. Soil structure improved permanently, resisting compaction, erosion, and nutrient loss. Yield increases of 200 to 300% were recorded in degraded soils, not just in ideal conditions but across climates, from humid tropics to temperate regions. Terra preta systems functioned in dry environments by retaining water and in wet environments by preventing nutrient runoff. This wasn't a niche solution, it was universal, and that universality posed a problem far larger than agronomy. Then the momentum stalled. Funding that had supported promising studies began to disappear. Research papers failed to reach major journals. Scientists who had been deeply involved quietly shifted to other projects, often into synthetic soil amendments and chemical optimization. Terra preta wasn't disproven. It wasn't replaced by a better solution. It simply faded from the conversation. The question wasn't whether it worked. The evidence was already there. The question was why a soil system that reduced dependency, eliminated recurring costs, and permanently restored land stopped receiving attention at the exact moment it proved its value. To find the answer, you have to look beyond the field plots and into the economics of agriculture itself. By the time Terra preta showed real promise, the fertilizer industry had already become one of the most powerful forces in global agriculture. Its entire structure depended on one assumption: soil must be fed every season. Synthetic fertilizers were not designed to build permanent fertility, but to deliver short-term nutrients that would wash away, volatilize, or be consumed within a single growing cycle. That cycle guaranteed repeat sales, year after year, across millions of farms. Terra preta challenged that foundation at its core: a soil system that only needed to be built once, that reduced fertilizer use to near zero, and that improved rather than degraded over time, represented an existential threat. It wasn't competing with fertilizers, it made them unnecessary. And in an industry driven by volume and repetition, permanence is a liability. What followed was not a dramatic shutdown, but something quieter and far more effective. Lobbying efforts pushed research funding towards synthetic inputs and chemical optimization. Universities increasingly relied on industry-backed grants, steering soil science towards solutions that aligned with commercial interests. Terra preta research was reframed as impractical or irrelevant, not through direct refutation, but through neglect. Studies were redirected, delayed, or published in obscure journals where they attracted little attention. Conferences stopped discussing it. Textbooks left it out. Over time, an entire generation of agronomists was trained without ever encountering the concept. The public wasn't told Terra preta failed, they were simply never told it existed. To justify this disappearance, a familiar set of talking points emerged. Biochar was labeled too expensive to produce. Terra preta was said not to scale. It was dismissed as unproven for modern agriculture, despite decades of positive data. Yet outside institutional agriculture, something inconvenient was happening. Backyard gardeners, small farmers, and independent researchers were testing biochar on their own, with no grants, no corporate backing, and no reason to protect an industry model, and they kept getting the same results. Healthier soil, higher yields, lower costs. While the official narrative questioned feasibility, the soil itself kept proving otherwise, quietly, consistently, and far from the spotlight where it once threatened to change everything. What finally brought Terra preta back from obscurity wasn't a government program or a corporate initiative. It was the internet. Farmers began sharing before and after photos of exhausted land brought back to life. Gardeners posted yield comparisons that defied conventional expectations. Old research papers, long buried in university archives, resurfaced as independent academics and soil scientists started revisiting data that had been ignored for decades. At the same time, a global DIY biochar movement began taking shape. People started producing biochar from agricultural waste, pruning debris, and crop residues, then documenting the results openly. Unlike earlier research, these experiments couldn't be quietly shelved. They were visible, repeatable, and shared in real time. Modern studies soon followed, confirming what indigenous farmers had already known. Biochar-based soils behave fundamentally differently from chemically dependent systems. At the center of this revival is the science that explains why terra preta works so reliably. Biochar is not fertilizer. It is infrastructure. Its highly porous structure creates an immense internal surface area, providing stable habitats for beneficial microbes that would otherwise be washed out of the soil. These microbial communities convert nutrients into plant-available forms and hold them in place, preventing leaching and loss. Nutrients bind to the biochar's surface instead of disappearing into groundwater. Water is retained within the pores, making the soil more resilient during drought, while still allowing excess moisture to drain away. Each growing season adds organic matter, feeding the microbial network further. The result is a self-perpetuating fertility cycle, where soil health compounds instead of declining. Real-world results now mirror the ancient evidence. On small farms, degraded land has been transformed in as little as 2 years, shifting from compacted, lifeless ground to dark, friable soil that produces consistently higher yields. Urban gardeners report eliminating fertilizer costs entirely while growing more food in less space. Even commercial-scale operations have begun integrating biochar successfully, not as a temporary amendment, but as a foundational investment in soil health. Across climates, scales, and growing systems, the pattern is the same. When soil is treated as a living system rather than a disposable medium, fertility stops being something you buy and starts being something you build. Creating your own version of terra preta does not require ancient rituals or specialized equipment. At its core, it is a carefully balanced soil system designed to lock fertility in place instead of letting it escape. The basic structure is simple but deliberate. Roughly 40% biochar forms the backbone of the mix, acting as the permanent framework that holds nutrients and water. About 30% compost supplies organic matter, microbes, and immediate fertility. The remaining 30% comes from your native soil, which introduces local mineral content and microbial life already adapted to your environment. Optional additions like rock dust or bone meal can be included to increase trace minerals, but they are enhancements, not requirements. What matters most is balance. Terra preta is not about dumping inputs into the soil. It is about building a stable living system that improves with time. Biochar itself can be sourced in several ways, and this flexibility is part of why the system works across so many regions. It can be made safely at home using controlled, low-oxygen burning methods that convert agricultural waste, wood scraps, or pruning debris into stable carbon. For those who prefer not to produce their own, biochar is increasingly available from agricultural suppliers and soil amendment producers. In farming regions, crop residues and processing waste can be converted into biochar at scale, turning what was once discarded into long-term soil fertility. Regardless of the source, quality matters. The biochar should be clean, fully carbonized, and free of chemical contamination. It is not a fertilizer. It is the structure that allows fertility to stay where plants can actually use it. Before application, one step is critical and often misunderstood: activation. Fresh biochar must be charged with nutrients before it goes into the ground. Uncharged biochar will initially absorb nutrients from the soil, delaying results. Activation is simple: mixing biochar thoroughly with compost, manure, or nutrient-rich organic matter allows it to load itself with minerals and microbial life. Once activated, the blend can be incorporated into garden beds, fields, or planting rows. It should be mixed into the topsoil, rather than left on the surface, creating a continuous zone where roots, microbes, and biochar interact. Results are not instant in every case. The first season often shows improved water retention and plant vigor. By the second season, soil structure, yield, and resilience become noticeably different. Each year after that compounds the effect. When compared to conventional fertilizer use, the economics of terra preta reveal why it was never widely promoted. The initial investment, whether in time, materials, or purchase costs, is higher than buying a single bag of fertilizer. But fertilizers must be reapplied every season, sometimes multiple times per year, indefinitely. Terra preta does not. Most growers reach a break-even point within 1 to 2 growing seasons, after which fertilizer costs drop dramatically, or disappear altogether. The long-term savings extend not just over years, but over decades. Fertility remains in the soil. Inputs decline. Resilience increases. Instead of chasing yields with recurring purchases, the soil itself becomes the asset. And once that shift happens, the economics of agriculture begin to look very different. This story has never really been about soil alone. It is about control, resilience, and who gets to decide how food is grown. When fertility depends on products that must be purchased every season, food systems become fragile and centralized. Terra preta represents the opposite approach. It shows that fertility can be built locally, maintained indefinitely, and passed forward instead of depleted. This knowledge shifts power away from supply chains and back into the ground itself. Food security stops being a global abstraction and becomes something tangible, rooted in living soil that does not collapse when inputs disappear. There is also a climate story woven into this soil. Biochar locks carbon into the ground for hundreds to thousands of years, turning farms and gardens into long-term carbon sinks instead of sources. While modern agriculture often accelerates erosion and emissions, terra preta quietly reverses both. It stores carbon, reduces runoff, improves water retention, and stabilizes ecosystems from the ground up. These changes do not rely on future technology or political promises. They rely on systems that already exist and have already been proven, waiting to be rebuilt at scale. The most important step does not require conversion or commitment. Try terra preta in just one garden bed this season. One controlled experiment is enough to see the difference. As results spread, a quiet community continues to grow. Farmers, gardeners, and researchers share data, failures, refinements, and successes openly. Knowledge that was once buried in journals and forgotten studies is being rebuilt in public view. That visibility matters, because systems like this only disappear when they are kept hidden. The soil revolution is not coming. It is already happening, bed by bed, field by field, outside the spotlight of industrial agriculture. The question is whether this knowledge will be used or forgotten again. If this kind of forgotten agricultural wisdom matters, subscribe and stay connected. Because the future of food may depend less on what we invent next, and more on what we choose to remember.